Let's learn everything you need to know to get your first stop motion film well underway, and for basically no money.
Tip-tot.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Tip-tot, and today, as you can see from our little setup here, we're going to be doing some stop motion animation. So let's just jump right into it. Okay, so first things first, we should probably do a little bit of a checklist. Things that you might find yourselves needing when you're doing your first stop motion film. First thing, obviously, is a camera of some kind. I'm just using my mobile phone camera here. I've got it on a little tripod. You might find that to be really useful, and you can pick them up for quite cheap on Amazon for just a few pounds if you type in phone tripod. Alternatively, you can make one of your own, maybe like stacking it up on books and resting it there. But you'll find it's much easier if you do have a proper little tripod, so you can just plonk your camera down and adjust it as needed, and it won't move much, which is the most important thing. You'll also need something, obviously, that you're going to be stop motioning. For me, it's going to be these Lego characters here because they're fun and easy and simple, and I had them to hand. You'll probably want to, if you're doing a proper stop motion film, dress up your environment a little bit better than I've done here. I just needed the space so that I could have all my filming equipment out, like my microphone and my camera, to show you guys the tutorial. Okay, so you might want to do a bit of a background or a bit of a better floor, that sort of thing. You also might need a length of thread. Black probably isn't the best color, but it's all I had to hand, so it's what I'll be using, and we'll come to that a little bit later on in the tutorial. Okay, now that we've got everything set up, it's time to look at how to actually do some stop motion. As I mentioned before, I'm using Stop Motion Studio here, and the tutorial is going to be based on this. It's a free app that you can download, or it's £5 to unlock some pro features like 4K and stuff like that. Okay. Now, all I'm going to do is hit New Movie on here, and that's going to open up our film view. And as you can see, we can look at the camera and look at our characters through that as well. Down the left-hand side, you've got some settings. So I'm just going to go through a few of these for you now. You want to set it to 12 frames per second, which is usually a good speed for stop motion like this. I'm going to set my resolution to square because I'll be releasing it on Instagram. You can do overlays and things like that. I'm going to choose my settings to be 4K. If you don't have that, if this is the free app, I think only goes up to HD quality. And then you can do looping playback and things like that as well. Just hit done there. That's all you need to know. Then if you go to the camera option up in the top, this is where you'll actually be taking photos. But there's a few settings here you need to fix as well, such as choosing your camera. So I've got a few cameras. Hello, there's me. Nice upshot of my nose there. And I've got a wide angle camera as well, which might be better for some shots. But I'm going to leave it on camera 1 for now. I'm going to go to my exposure settings, and I'm going to choose, instead of auto or instead of AL, where you tap to set the lock, focus and exposure, I'm going to set P, which is tap to set lock focus with manual exposure. And what that means is you'll get less flickering between your shots when you're taking photos, because if I just lay this camera up now and position it to look at Steve, you'll notice that I can tap to focus, okay, but I can adjust exposure of the shot manually, which means that I can make sure my camera shouldn't flicker between shots. So I'm just going to drag that down until Steve looks pretty good, okay? So that's all the setup done. Let's line up our first shot and actually get to doing some stop motion. So I've got a little story here. I'm going to have Steve look at the camera and then turn to look at this skeleton. The skeleton's then going to raise his bow and shoot Steve and knock him over, okay? And that's all that the animation's going to be. So I'm going to set up my first shot here, and I kind of want it to be a close-up of Steve. Then it's going to do a close-up of the skeleton. Then it's going to smash cut to a wide shot. So if you want to, you can physically move your camera in like I'm doing here to get this like top-down close-up, or you can go to your settings here, go to the plus option, and you can physically zoom in with the camera, which you might find to be a little bit better. So I'm going to get it as close as I can. I'm actually going to move the camera back so that I don't accidentally knock it, which is very important. And then I'm going to focus in on Steve, tap to set my focus settings, and then zoom in until his face kind of fills the camera. Okay. What this also does as well is makes your depth of field a bit higher, so that if you don't have a proper background set, then that's less of an issue. Okay, so find the shot that you're happy with. Make sure that your camera settles and it isn't drifting down. Mine has finished settling there, so that's good. And I'll just position it until I'm happy. So we now have our first shot lined up and ready to go. So if you just take the picture here by clicking the picture button, it'll give you a little bit of a delay before it actually takes the picture. And then if you go back to your main menu, you notice you have your first picture taken already. Okay, so let's go back to camera view. Now you'll notice that if I just remove Steve here, I've got a ghost of where Steve used to be, and that's this slider setting on the left here. I can slide this up and down to basically show an onion skin. Off means there's no onion skin or no preview of the previous or next frames, and on means that you can see it. So I'm going to slide to about halfway. I'm going to reposition Steve back where he was, and the Lego means that I can just clip him into the same cube that he was on before, and it should be pretty much the same. Okay, and then I'm just going to move his head ever so slightly, and this is called easing, in that the motion is going to be quite slow and then speed up as he turns his head. So I'm going to take the photo, and you'll know it's taking the photo if you've got volume off when your ghosting image disappears. Okay, so I'm going to hold down on Steve's base and just twist his head just a little bit more. This time maybe a fraction more than I twisted it last time. Take the photo. Okay, so you can see quite a simple process. Maybe speed it up a little bit. And once we've finished this head turn, we're going to check our progress. So you can notice I've done some quite large movements there, and then I'm going to do some smaller ones as his head settles. Because you'll notice when you turn your head in real life, you'll start slowly and end slowly, and then the middle of the movement will be a little bit faster. Okay. One really important thing that I see a lot of beginners do is like that. I'll accidentally move other portions of the model when I don't mean to, so I'll just position that back. But also I won't move my arm completely out of frame. It sounds simple, right? But if I'm here, you'll notice that I'm casting a shadow on Steve's shoulder, despite my hand not actually being in the shot, and that shadow is going to flicker and look strange. So it's just little things like that you need to make sure you're not accidentally doing. Okay, so take a picture. Now you can add a frame hold to this if you wanted to make this frame last a few frames. What I'm actually going to do is just take a couple of photos instead, because I believe then there'll be little minor changes and that'll make it look a bit nicer. Okay, let's go back. And let's click play if you flick back. There you go. You can see our first little bit of animation. Okay. Seems pretty good. Okay. Now I know I'm pretty much happy with that shot. I don't want to add in any extra frames. So I'm now okay to move my camera, which is what I'm going to do to look at the skeleton from the other side. So obviously at the moment I'm quite zoomed in, which is why that framing looks a bit weird. But if I twist to show my skeleton, you'll notice that with my microphone set up here and everything, I can't move the camera as much. So what I'm going to do is go back out of these settings here. Oops, I've just accidentally backed out of my movie there. So I'll just drop back into my camera settings here, go to the settings there, choose zoom level, and just zoom it all the way back out. And I can't quite get far enough away. So what I'm going to do is go to my camera, choose camera 3, which is my wider angle shot. And then position this camera like so, looking down at the skeleton. Then I can use, I'm just going to turn off the onion skin so it's a bit easier to see. Then I can use the zoom settings of the camera to zoom in and get a similar shot. Doesn't have to be exactly the same. But you can see here I've kind of like run out of desk. Now because the background doesn't really matter, I could actually just push my set back a little bit. Obviously we couldn't do this if we had a background that we were using properly, but we haven't really seen this yet. And we also haven't seen the wide angle yet. So they don't really have a context because in the previous scene, there wasn't much behind Steve, okay? So anyway, let's use this. Let's zoom in a little bit further on our skeleton, frame him up correctly. Now be careful, because if you're zoomed in like this, then any minor movements to the camera are going to seem a little bit more extreme. Okay, so I'm just going to hold the base of my skeleton. I'm going to turn his head for my first shot. have him look directly at the frame and take a photo. Okay, turn up our onion skin just a little bit. And holding this part of his body so it doesn't move too much, we can just start to turn his head slightly. Okay, now I'm going to adjust this just a little bit so that it's easier to see the movements. That looks pretty okay. Take a photo. Okay, now move his head just a touch more. Trying not to move his body unless you want it to. And you can see that there's bits of the image here, like on his face, okay? So on across his eyes here, where you can clearly see the movement a bit better. So you can use that as a frame of reference. Take a photo. It doesn't matter if his body moves a little bit because he is moving. So that'll give a bit of life, but you don't want any unintended movement, okay? So maybe what I'll do is, as I turn his head just a little bit more here, like this, maybe I'll start to move his arm down as well for a bit of extra motion. Okay. So let's take that photo. Move his arm down a bit further. His head, however, is still settling at this point, so there won't be much movement on his head. But there will be more movement on his arm. His arm's going to continue to swing down, where his head has pretty much finished moving at this point. And this is called secondary motion, which adds a little bit of extra realism to your shots because people are moving a bit more realistically. They're not moving like one limb at a time, yeah? So we'll just have his arm finish up movement there, just with a tiny, tiny bit of movement. And we'll do the exact same thing we did before, which is to take a few photos just to settle the image, and we can play our animation. There you go. So he's looking. So you can see the decline in quality a little bit because I've zoomed in, but that's not too much of an issue because this is only going to go on Instagram anyway. So they're looking at each other, Now here comes the fun bit where we're going to be using our thread and stuff like that, okay? So I'm going to straighten up this camera and I'm going to make it a wider angle again. So we're going to our camera mode and we'll zoom out. So you can see here we've got a really wide lens, which is great for these long shots. And I am just going to position them up in the middle here just so that I can put my camera, I've got a slant on my desk, just so I can put my camera where I need it. Okay, might zoom in just a little bit to get rid of some of that extra background rubbish and to correctly frame up our dudes. Okay. So maybe even actually if I rest it against the wall, then that'll help the character stop moving too much. So we can do something like that. If I move the camera physically closer, I can zoom out more. Maybe I can even zoom out all the way to 1, which means that it's going to be less grainy, better quality, which is always good. And we can finish framing our shot. Okay, cool. Now, what we want to happen here is for Steve to raise his little pick, okay? However, you'll notice on the character, if I just, if I can, ooh, I haven't taken a photo yet of this one, so I'll just make sure I'm happy and I'll take a photo just so I've got that ghost image. So we'll take that first photo. Okay, so now I've got that ghost image. So I can see where I can put Steve back, okay? You'll notice on the back of Steve, he's got this little lever here that controls his arm. Now we could, if we wanted to, cheat a little bit and swap his pick to the other hand because this hand doesn't have a little lever, but then his pick's not going to be very well in frame, okay? So what we're going to do is use our thread. This is what we spoke about before. And this is the same if you were to like tip something over or to like a bin full of stuff and you wanted it to hover in the air for a few frames, you do the same technique. Okay, so I've just cut myself a length of thread like so. And I'm going to see if I can't loop it through that little lever on the back, or probably better. Now, this is why I said you don't want black thread if you can help it. But if I just pop Steve here you could tie yourself a loop in your thread, like so. Okay. Hook it around a portion of your model, preferably a place where you can't really see. But again, like here, I'm just using it as a demonstration. Okay. So you've got that section now. I'm just gonna see if I can't get rid of some of the excess thread here by tying a nice double knot and then just chopping that off with a pair of scissors. I have a thread that I can use to pull Steve's arm up and down. Now you can see why black isn't the best option, but it's not to worry because I do have video editing software and Photoshop and things like that I can use to remove this afterwards in the same way that people remove wires. And also, like, yeah, you can see it there, but you can't really see it on the model. So it's going to be quite easy to remove that from the background, which is quite clean, especially if I take this thread and I duck it behind the pick like that. Okay. And then the only place I'm going to actually have to remove it from is behind the scene. And here you can get some really quick fire stuff here. Okay. So let's have a nice taut frame. One. So his arm actually moved a little bit there in the model, which I didn't realize. So I'll just lay that thread down. I'll go back. I'll select that last frame here and I will delete it because his arm moves and I don't like that. We'll push his arm back. Should be able to see where it was in the previous frame. If we go into our ghosting mode here, you'll notice that his arm was down by his side. So let's fix that again. Lovely job. Okay, now we can grab our piece of thread, hold it up, take a photo. You can see there was a change in light there, but I can't really control that because I'm not in a studio set. And now I'm just going to take a few photos as he raises his pick. And then one where he's settling. Okay, now I'm just going to hold here for a minute. There we go. And then instead of doing all that again, as he brings the pick down, I'm just going to go back. And I'm going to check that it looks good first, okay? That looks pretty okay. So he's looking, he raises his pick. Cool, that looks fine. So let's now, oops, I backed out of the movie again. Let's now go back to where he is here. Back to our camera view. Oops, it somehow changed camera, so that's not good. We'll go back to camera 3. There we go. Now we need to have his pick come back down, unless we want to be really clever and like keep his pick held up as the other guy raises his arm, but that's going to be pretty complicated for me to do whilst I'm filming. So I am just going to do a couple of frames. Just dismiss that pop-up there. As his pick starts to come back down. Where we just got the resting frames and using this piece of thread to just ever so slightly and gently lower his pick until he's done. Okay, now I don't think I'm going to need this piece of thread again. I might need it as Steve tilts backwards later, but just to keep things clean and neat, we're going to cut it out of our frame. Like so. Okay, don't need this anymore. Rubbish, get rid of it. We've had him raising up there. So now we're going to have our skeleton, and this one's a bit easier because his arm is on a hinge. So he's going to raise his hand up. Let's just take one more shot without the string in it. And we'll just have him raise this a bit. Now we're going to get a bit clever here because we're going to have Steve react by raising his arm as slightly after the skeleton raises his arm here. And what that means is, if I just reframe this shot for you guys. Now what that means is we're going to have to animate two characters at once. So we'll just start off with animating this skeleton because Steve's going to have to see him moving before he reacts. So a couple of frames of this guy raising his arm nice and slowly. And then on this frame, we'll have Steve start to react to it by raising his back arm and shaking his head no. Okay. So now we've got two characters to worry about. Not only do we have to keep this guy's arm raising, we've got to also raise Steve's arm a little bit. Continue the head shake. Okay, take a photo. Raise his arm a little bit more. Steve's arm's going to come up a bit quicker now because he's really starting to panic. That looks pretty good. Take that photo. Now the skeleton at this point has finished raising his arm. We'll have him do a little bit of a settlement, okay? And also we'll continue to raise Steve's arm. He's going to have a really quick head turn. And at this point, the skeleton's pretty much finished moving. So we'll just have him settle like that. We'll have Steve's arm begin to settle and his head begin to settle onto the shake of no. And then for this one, we'll just reposition him slightly so that there is a bit of movement. And now we just need to finish Steve's head shaking. So he starts to turn his head back the other way. And we're back down to animating one character, which is nice and easy. And I'll just fast forward through this bit. Okay, great. So we've got Steve shaking his head. Let's take a look at the whole animation. That looks pretty good, actually, not going to lie. So the next bit is going to be the skeleton releasing his arrow and shooting it through the air. Okay, so we're going to go to the end of our animation here. Okay, and we're going to need an extra piece of thread here. I've also got this little parrot character, which I might have him flap down at the end. That'd be quite funny. But we need basically two long pieces of thread. So I'm going to cut a nice long piece. And then I'll just chop that piece in half. So we've got two pieces of thread, okay? You could do this with just the one, but it might be a little bit easier to do it with two. So I'm going to take my two pieces of thread. Again, you might be better off with fishing wire here, but I didn't have any to hand. And our skeleton actually can shoot this arrow, okay? So we're going to take this arrow and we're going to do some animation where Steve gets shot. So first of all, you'll notice it's spring loaded. So if I pop him back in there, you'll also notice that I stupidly just moved his arm loads. So if we turn up the ghost, we'll see how much. But that's okay because he has just shot the bow. So in the next frame, we want it to release pretty quickly. So I'm going to have the bow kind of rocket up like this. Oops, I just broke it off of his hand. That's not very good, is it? See if I can't pop that back on. There we go. So the bow's going to rocket up backwards. If I can reattach it. Now I've got a load of work to do to reposition him back correctly. So let's do that. If I change the thing here so it's a bit easier to see half and half. There we go, good. So he's going to, sure, he rocks his head backwards too. And his bow backwards. And I'm just going to release this from the spring. And we're going to have one frame where it's just about to release. So we'll quickly take that photo. And then on the next frame, his whole body's going to be rocking back from the force of like releasing the bow. Okay, so bam, maybe like that. I don't know, that's quite a lot of movement, isn't it? Let's just have him rock back gently. And at this point, the bow is going to be pretty much released. So we'll do this. Okay. And now we can take the arrow out. And we're just going to grab our piece of thread and tie a little loop in it. And then we're going to tie this loop around the end of the arrow. Like this. And then if you can, I'm not very good, I've got these big chubby fingers. I'm going to try and double knot it without it falling off the arrow. Yeah, nice, cool. So there's our first piece of thread attached to this arrow. And we just got to do the same bit with the other end. And this is so that we can control the trajectory. So we'll just take both of these. Again, we'll tie it around the end of the arrow. And this one will be a bit tougher because there's no lump for it to catch onto. So we'll just take these. And tie it up. There we go. So now we've got our 2 lengths of thread. I'm just going to chop off the excess there and hope that I've got enough to keep my hands out of frame. But if I don't, it's not the end of the world. Okay. And now I can make my arrow fly. Okay, which is pretty cool. Now, obviously, I'm going to have to hold these in one hand. I'm going to have to try and have a steady hand. But if you kind of pinch, if you can see, I'm going to lay them across my fingers and then just pinch. You can wrap around there and that will stop it swinging too much. But remember, all you need is one release, okay? Maybe we're going to have it like there. Don't worry too much about my hand being in the shot. We can Photoshop that out later. And I'm just going to, bam, take the photo. A lot of work at the moment for just one shot, but not to worry because we're now going to have Steve reacting to this by rocking back loads. And we'll even just take him and we'll shift him back an entire square, okay? Because this is going to be some really fast movement here. Again, I'm going to take my threads. Oops. And I'm going to wrap them around my finger. And you need to make sure that the trajectory of the arrow is correct. So you can kind of like change the length there. Oh, it's backwards though. There we go. And we're still going to make Steve get hit in the face with it. And we will just, boom. There we go. Nice. That's the next frame. So the next frame then, we will take him all the way back and he's going to kind of fly out of screen. Have his other arm, if we can, come up. And what I'll also do is I'll just take, what have I got that I can use? I've got like another bit of Lego here, okay, that I'm just going to see if this may not work. I'm going to see if I can tuck that underneath at an angle that isn't going to make it fall over, but will let me tilt him back. No, I don't think we will. Okay, so instead, what we'll get is we've got plenty, and you'll notice I can kind of position my hand out of frame here. So I could tilt back and rest Steve on my hand, but then how am I going to, shoot him with the arrow still? Because the arrow still needs to be in the shot, right? So I'm just going to take something out of shot, something tall enough, maybe like, I don't know, my cactus. Bearing in mind, this whole video is about doing this on a 0 budget, yeah? I'm going to take this cactus and I'm going to tilt him back until he rests on it. Okay? Then that means I've got my arrow ready to go. That I can gently shoot him in the head with. Like that. Okay, now I think that's the last shot that we're going to need from this angle. So let's just play it and see. Cool. Now we should have done some rocking back on this skeleton as he shoots. Okay. So we should have had, like as he shoots, he should have gone like this because of the force. But honestly, like doing it myself with no rigging and stuff like that, there's some things that you're just going to have to limit if you don't think you can handle that. But now we're on to the next shot, which is nice because it means I can just move all this out the way. And we're just going to have Steve slide in on the floor like this. And he's just going to and come to a stop. Okay. And then we might have a parrot land on his head. Who knows? So we're going to position our guy. We'll go definitely for this one, definitely go back to the other camera, camera 1. And see if I can't angle it down a bit more. Gotta make sure we're not going to fall over though. So we go like this, we go into our zoom, we can zoom in so that he slides in nice and easily. Done, awesome. And there must be a way, if I can take these threads off the arrow quite easily, there's probably a way we can embed the arrow into him and hit him in the face. So we can probably see what's underneath this Lego head. I can't really remember. It is hollow. It is hollow, which is, oh, it's not actually that useful because those brown blocks there. So that's fine. So maybe we can have, yeah, hit him in the head, but maybe we could like jam the arrow into his neck like that. Maybe. Like, yeah, they saw him get hit in the head, but who cares? Let's move him out of shot. And we're going to just start with an empty frame. So we'll take that photo. Boom. Very nice. And then he's going to fly into shot quite quickly. So let's have him here, and also we'll just tap focus onto him. Nice. Oops, I didn't actually take a photo, or did it? Just the onion skin. Yep, the onion skin's just off. So sliding into frame. Now here we've got some proper easing because he's going to have to slide to a stop in a position where we want him. So we'll do that, but also we'll do some actual overshoot here as his arm kind of moves backwards with the emphasis of his movement. He'll start to come to a stop. His arm's going to start to come to a stop. He'll move just a little bit more. We probably should take this off of his feet now because he's sliding. So what we'll have to do is go back and probably delete this last frame because it's got his legs in it. So I have to redo that last frame. So it was there, and he's going to move maybe to like here. I accidentally just moved the floor, so I'll just twist that back. Okay. So bang, like so. Here he'll have to move just a little bit as he's starting to slide to a stop. His arm back just a little bit more. And at this one, he's pretty much come to a stop, and we'll have his arm start to fall back down to the ground. Okay. Because we've got the photo. Now I'm going to try and just move his arm without moving anything else whatsoever. Notice we've also got reflections on the body now as well, so that's something to think about. As he falls down to a stop, his arm's going to come to rest. Ooh, so there he moved quite a bit. I might delete that frame because I accidentally moved his whole body there. So let's get back in. Finish him up. Push him back into position. Okay, great. So we'll do a couple of resting frames there just by tapping a few times. Maybe up to 93. Great. Now, final shot, we'll have this bird sort of flap down. I think I'll just have him flap down and land on his chest like that because you can kind of see quite nicely there. What what we can probably do is if we are zoomed in, which we are, we could do something clever where we do like a camera snap out. So I'm on 2x zoom here. What I'm going to do is just move it ever so slightly outwards to the next shot. So let's do this in increments. So we've got that 2x increment. Let's go to the next 1x increment there. So you might have to zoom past it and then just like that. Okay. Let's hit done and take a photo. And here we're going to have camera movement, which is really cool. Okay. So we'll go back out maybe a bit further this time. Take a photo. So at this point, we can just have the bird continue to drop down. And then he's going to land, yeah. So as he's landed, that's fine. I'll just see if I can't push that arrow back into position and move the bird like that. So he's landed in position. Basically, his arms are just going to flop down a little bit. So let's see if we can't do that and position him so that he's in roughly the same place. Continues to move his arms down. And again, continuing to move his arms down. Push that arrow back into place. And then he should be able to settle pretty nicely. With a few more frames of just finishing off his flap. And that is pretty much it. So let's take a look at our finished animation. Okay, that looks pretty good. So the next step is to take this onto the computer and tidy up and remove those wires and things like that. So without any further ado, let's just do that. Your next step is just to go to the main menu of Stop Motion Studio and choose your file, then choose Share and Save As Images. This will allow you to edit the individual images easily in Photoshop, and then we'll bring them into a different piece of software to bring them all together. If you don't want to do this step, you can just export as a video from here and your job is done. Okay, so here we are on our computer, and all I have done is taken my files. If I just go to the correct folder, I've taken all of my stop motion tut.zip files, extracted them, and we've ended up with a folder full of images from our animation. But you'll notice there's a few issues. Okay, so there's at one point here, our character, the lighting changes. I'm not quite sure what happened, but obviously something changed. Maybe the cloud, someone behind a cloud or something, which is why it's best to have a studio or like at least a closed room to do this in. And of course, we've also got our frames where we need to remove these strings. You can see there's no string. And then as we start to raise up the pickaxe and stuff, there's string in some of these frames. So I'm just going to show you how to do one of them here. So let's take the first frame where the string can be seen, which is frame 27. Okay. And we can right click that and just choose it, open with Photoshop. And it's going to open up Photoshop for us. Now, there's two ways you can do this. One way is to just duplicate your layer, grab your clone brush tool, and then holding Alt and clicking nearby the string, you can then paint that texture over the top. But as you can see, this takes a little bit of time. And also you might get this strange haloing effect if your lighting is a bit off, which it will be if you don't have a proper studio to do this in. So the way I prefer to do it is go to the previous frame where we know the camera didn't really move much at all, okay, and overlay that on the top. So now we have frame 26 on top of frame 27, and you can probably understand what we're going to do, which is grab our polygonal brush tool or selection tool, just choose an area that covers up most of the string, and then just press mask. And as you can see, we now have frame 27 pretty much all masked out. Okay, but there are some issues. There's like a hard line and stuff here. So if you feather your mask a little bit, that will probably solve that issue. Not too much, because if you feather too much, obviously you're going to get the ghost of the next frame on the pickaxe. but just feather to the point where you can't really see the edges. And then you can just come in with your brush tool. And if I zoom in, you'll be able to see there's this line from the bit there. So we can just paint that out. And there you go. So let's hit save on that, which is obviously going to save a Photoshop file. And we will save it into this folder, which is inside of stop motion tut. I've just made a new folder. I'll delete that one because I don't need it. Just make a new folder called adapted frames or something like that. Double click that and just save it in there. Obviously that's going to be a PSD, which is no good to us. So we can go to file, export as, and there's going to be a option for JPEG, which is the original file we used. So we can hit export on that. And then it's already named frame 27. So if you hit yes, it will replace it. If you want to keep your original files, obviously just stick them in a different folder. Now, I'm not going to do that for every single frame, but you'd obviously do that for all the frames that you want to. Then you can go into Premiere Pro. You can see all of your frames in here. We're going to import those as a single item. So I'm going to double click on my project window here. Select the first frame from that sequence, make sure image sequence is checked and just choose open. And that's going to create a single item for us in Premiere Pro, which if we double click in our source window, we can see is our animation. But you can also see it's going really, really fast, right? And that's because it's changed the frame rate here to 25 frames per second, which is no good. We shot it in 12. So you go right click, modify, interpret footage, and just change the frame rate in there to 12 frames per second again. From there, you can right click, new sequence from clip, which will create a sequence for you. And once it's inside your sequence, you're going to have your 12 frames per second animation. But you can see that it hasn't actually cropped it because we shared it as images rather than as a video. So that's easy to fix. You can just right click on your sequence, choose sequence settings, and up here under the video section, you just need to make that square. So it'll be 2160 by 2160. Just hit OK. Yes, all the previews will be deleted. That's fine. It will regenerate new ones. And as you can see, our animation is now once again square and looking pretty good. You can shoot, off, bam. And then we zoom out and a bird lands on him. Okay, so at this point, if we scrub, we can see that there's a random change in color. I don't know what happened there. Maybe I accidentally changed the white balance settings. So down here in the project panel, I'm just going to hit add new and then adjustment layer, which can be found here. And we'll just rename this CC for color correct. Drag that over the section of the sequence we'd like to color correct. Go to your effects browser and just type in fast, which should bring up fast color corrector. And what this will allow us to do, if we can just flip back and forth, okay, we can go to our effects controls, select the CC here, scroll down to where it says white balance and just cool off our footage a little bit by dragging it away from white. And you can flip back and forth to see if you can't get it pretty close. It's a bit too yellow, so we'll just drag it more towards the blue. And that's looking pretty close now. I wouldn't say that that's noticeable as a change, okay? So let's have a little look. Yeah, there's clearly something happening there because there's a color change for these few frames as well. So what I'm going to do is just quite easily stretch this out. Move over those 2 frames that I knew the color change was. Split that with the razor tool, which is shortcut C. And then find the point where it breaks again, which was here. So we've just got a duplicate layer. There we go. Now, obviously I'm casting shadows as I'm like lowering the guy on, and you could have fixed that by putting him on a piece of string, etc. So I'll just quickly go through and remove the rest of these strings here in a time lapse, and we'll come back when that is finished. Hi guys, so obviously I'm not removing just the strings here. I'm going through in After Effects and removing every single background from every single frame. This is because I decided to take it one step further and add a drawn background in using Adobe Animate later on. Obviously, if I'd planned to do this from the beginning, I would have shot these characters up against some kind of green screen. But as I decided to do it later on, that made a lot of hard work for me. So I just brought them all into After Effects as images, went through frame by frame and cut the backgrounds out. Once I had finished cutting out all of the backgrounds in After Effects, I applied some simple filters over the top. This wasn't much, and I won't go into too much detail because that's a tutorial for another day. But essentially, I combined all of my shots into a single pre-composition, and then to each of those pre-comps I added a stroke so that the characters could be outlined in a white stroke, and then added an adjustment layer above that pre-composition that added a simple linear gradient over the top, and eventually as well a paper texture and some light noise. The final step was, of course, then to bring the sample frames from each shot, so the frame which represented the shot best, as images into Adobe Animate. And then in Adobe Animate, just because that's the way I prefer drawing, I drew a quick background for each of the shots, just using simple colors and linear gradients to create this nice simple background scene. There were only 2 drawings needed because the first 3 shots could use the same background, just different levels of zoomed inness. And then the second shot was just a simple grass background. So again, if you'd like to see more details of this, I have tutorials on each. I just brought those backgrounds back into After Effects, added them into the scenes behind the characters, and then added a shadow by duplicating the character layer and putting it beneath the other characters. And then the final result looked something like this. So as you can see there, we have the entire stop motion process from start to finish. Now you can see that obviously I used some paid software at the end there to add all the extra special stuff, but hopefully you'll agree that that isn't needed and is just a nice additional step. Hopefully you guys can get started with stop motion with something as simple as your phone and some Lego figures. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time for another episode of TipTut. I'd like to take some time to thank my level 2 and above members: Unknown Ghosts, WN62, Anonymous, Brew Draws, Mel M. Hoover, and Maybe Sharma. You guys are lovely and you're keeping the lights on here at TipTut. If you'd like to become a member and get shoutouts at all your videos, click the join button to find out what opportunities await you there in the TipTut zone.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.